Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for having me here. I gotta say, I'm thrilled to be at this conference. The quality of the talks that I've seen have been excellent. In some ways, I'm a little concerned because I'm building on the ideas of what those guys just said and what Taylor said yesterday in his talk and what Dio was talking about, so I hope this isn't too repetitive. So my name's Daniel Burka. I'm a design partner at Google Ventures, also now known as GV. So we're the venture capital arm of Google. So I don't really work on Google products anymore. I work entirely with a big group of companies. So we've invested over $2 billion at this point into about 300 startups. They're across a wide range of industries. So I get to work on a bunch of companies that are working in life sciences, so a company that's trying to cure cancer, a company that's working in neuroscience I was talking about yesterday. I get to work with Slack, who we've invested in, a whole bunch of consumer internet companies, a company that's working on macroeconomics, which I can never pronounce correctly. So I get to work with a ton of companies on a ton of problems with a ton of different people. I get to work with designers a lot of the time, I get to work with entrepreneurs, and I get to work with product people a lot of the time. And that gives me a nice 10,000-foot view of the design industry. And a few years ago, I went to England. We started investing in Europe. And I went over there on kind of a fact-finding mission. I wanted to see if English entrepreneurs had the same kinds of concerns and interests that entrepreneurs in the Bay Area did. It turned out there was a lot of commonality. So I went over there with one of my colleagues, Braden Kowitz, and we spent an entire week drinking coffee and meeting with entrepreneurs. So aside from being really, really caffeinated, I got to have some really interesting conversations. And we tried to structure them in a way that was almost research-driven. And we started always with the same question. And we said, oh, OK, so when you guys think of design, what do you think about? And it was really interesting. So I've been in a lot of user research studies. And you see the body language. And these entrepreneurs, these are really confident people, right? They're entrepreneurs, founders, CEOs. And they would sit back in their chair with their arms across their chest, and they'd look at us like, OK, I'm like in the principal's office being asked by a couple of designers about design. And they look really nervous. And they'd start talking, and they'd be like, oh, OK, so brand is really important to us. And that's not too surprising, especially in London. Brand has a long tradition. There's a deep heritage of branding in the UK and a lot of design schools that teach branding. Whoever controls this clock, can you maybe start it so I don't go way over time? There we go. I'll just talk all day if you let me. And so the first thing they talk about was branding, right? So they were a little nervous. They talk about branding. The next thing they talk about was usually look and feel. Our product needs to look great compared to our competitors, and we need to stand out in the market. And they maybe talk about usability. It needs to be easy to use. And then a few of them would talk about user experience. We want our customers to have a great experience using our app or using our site or buying our product. And that was great. That was an interesting discussion. And the next question we'd ask every time was, oh, OK, that's really interesting. What keeps you up at night? And immediately, the arms would come off the chest. They'd sit back in their chair, cross their legs, look all confident. Now they're talking about all kinds of different things. They started talking about new product ideas that they were considering pursuing. They were talking about moving into new markets. So many of them had established themselves in the UK and were now moving into the rest of Europe or moving west into the US market. And there were a lot of uncertainty and concern about that. A lot of concern about pricing. It was a great talk on the first day about pricing. There's a huge concern to them, like, is our product priced correctly? And then the other big concern that we heard a lot was about hiring and retaining talent. We're losing engineering talent to Google and Facebook. How do we compete against that? We've had a great engineer. They built up their career, and now they left us to go found a business. How do we keep growth happening within our company? They start talking about all these things that have nothing to do with design per se, right? They thought these were two different worlds. And what concerns me is that for the last maybe decade, designers have been arguing for a seat at the table. Over and over again, we've heard this either explicitly or implicitly saying, design can't be left to second tier. It's not just a service function. Design at the C-suite can have great effects on a business. And what I've seen from my vantage point, looking at a lot of different companies, is that what commonly happens is designers are now getting the seat at the table. CEOs, founders have heard that there's this pixie dust called design that Apple and Airbnb have applied, and somehow those companies make a lot of money. And maybe if I sprinkle some of that pixie dust on my product, we'll be really successful. Unfortunately, every time, even when they come and talk to me, if they see I've got design partner in my title, and they'll come into a meeting room, we're chatting, they ask me about specific design functions. Oh, okay, like what do you want to talk about? I want to talk about interfaces. I'm a really good designer. I've got a lot of experience. I can create good interfaces. That's fun and challenging. But what really happens is you turn around the conversation and start talking about what is core business. And I think very few designers are doing this. I see a lot of designers in the C-suite talking about design systems, talking about typography, talking about color, talking about interfaces, talking about the same things a CEO would expect that a designer would talk about. And then designers only get asked to work on these problems. And so designers, in effect, are left off on the side doing design while everyone else in the company is over on the other side of the office doing the business. And I think that's really unfortunate. I think it's a huge squandered opportunity for designers to have a lot of effect. When I sit down with a CEO and they talk about hiring and retaining talent, I'm like, oh, that's a systems design problem. Somebody's gone off and designed a process for hiring people. It's usually HR and recruiting teams. That's a designed process, no matter how you look at it. They're recruiting from certain places. They have a certain pitch that they give to the candidate. There's a process they go through with the interview and the way that we sell them on our company. That's a designed process. Designers, people with design in their title, are very infrequently actually working on that problem. If your CEO says that's the #1 problem that they're facing right now, designers should be working on it. We have excellent skills to pursue those issues. The way I look at it is, done right, design can be the scientific method for business. I'm going to unpack that. I think this is really important, and it's a huge opportunity for designers if we approach it correctly. And what I'm talking about is that all over your business, there are inklings, little pieces of ideas. Everyone in your business, whether it's your finance team and your legal team, whether it's your product team, where we typically think of these things coming from, or your recruiting team, your CEO, there are people all over your business with little inklings of ideas. And the reason I call them inklings instead of ideas is that they're really loosely formed. And the way that they're normally propagated is by PRDs, if you're a product person, or a PowerPoint presentation, if you're just about anybody in a business, or one-pagers, or just drawings on a whiteboard. And so you try to express these ideas, and they're coming from all over the place. And you express them this way, either as whiteboard sketches or PowerPoint presentations. And there's a big gap between what you're saying and what the other person's hearing. I think Dio had a really nice turn of phrase yesterday about this, that understanding isn't at the point of expression, it's at the point that someone hears it. I'm sure I'm quoting him very badly, but that was his basic premise, and I thought that resonated really well with me. It's exactly this problem. And so all over your company, whether it's how to recruit engineers, whether it's how to raise a new fund, or sorry, a new round, whether it's a product idea, these are all little inklings that are floating around and poorly formed and difficult to communicate. And they cause a lot of friction within a business. It's why we argue all the time. We're in meetings arguing past each other. We're all trying to guess what a user is going to do based on our decisions. And all I've learned from 20 years of doing design is that I'm wrong frequently, and so I'd like to be wrong as quickly as possible so I can move on to the next possibility, the next thesis. So if we think of this, inklings from a scientific perspective, these are your theses. These are the ideas that you have that you want to go and test as quickly as possible. Typically, whether, aside from just arguing about these things verbally within our company, the typical way that we test inklings, we test our theses, in startup land at least, is to ship early and ship often, so to build MVPs. We take our best guess, we build it as quickly as we can, we get it out in the wild, whether it's in a full launch or whether we're A/B testing it or doing a limited release. And then we try to measure it with analytics. There's a lot of problems with this model. I see the startups I'm working with are pursuing this model all of the time. One of the big problems is you really are taking one or two guesses. So if you think about it, you're arguing about which ideas you actually are going to go and pursue. You're very infrequently choosing really radical ideas. This is why incrementalism is so common in the tech world, is that taking a big idea where your entire company might fall on its face, you almost never pursue it, because you might fall on your face. And it's really hard to test multiple ideas head-to-head against each other this way, so we're usually just arguing in person about which single idea we're actually going to pursue. It usually takes much longer than you think it will to test an idea, and even when we're really fast at this, it's several weeks is considered very quick. I don't know if any of you guys have ever shipped a product on time, but if you have, congratulations, you're much better than the teams I've worked on. Once you've started engineering something, it's really, really hard to pull back. So you might have gotten fairly far down the line of engineering something, but now you're looking at it and it's 3/4 built, and you're like, oh, we've invested 3 weeks of our time in this, and like, I'm not feeling real good about it, but the whole point of this was to experiment, so like maybe we should still launch it. And it's really, really hard to abort at that point. And then once you get it out in the wild, the metrics that we hope are really clear are usually inconclusive. And we spend a lot of time arguing about them. What's the famous quote there? Lies, damn lies, and statistics. And the bigger problem is that even if there are clear stats, say something entirely falls on its face or it's a roaring success, because we're measuring quant, it's often very, very difficult to know why it succeeded or why it failed. And so it's really hard to repeat a success, or it's really hard to diagnose a failure. And then, if you've ever failed on something and then tried to pull it back, double congratulations to you if you've actually managed to yank code out of your app and not had a bunch of people come out with pitchforks and knives. You're much better than the teams I've worked on. And then we're supposed to iterate in this model and go around the loop again, and we rarely do because we move on to the next shiny object. So ideally, if we think of this from a lab environment, if we want to apply the scientific method here, what we'd love to do is do a study in the lab instead of out in the wild, simulate the real world, and avoid taking tons of time and avoid the risks of launching this out to a lot of people. So I think of prototyping as this kind of magic skill that designers can do, combined with other people. And I'll talk about that. Collaboration is the key here. But prototyping is this magic skill designers have. We can take something, these inklings, and make them appear real really quickly. So an inkling is this loose-edged idea that's being expressed by a bunch of people. We take it, we give it a little bit of form. Say we were designing a news app for vacationers. You stick it together, you throw it on a device using all these, we're in the golden age of prototyping tools. You can throw it in InVision or Marvel or whatever frickin' tool you like, and get it on a device and start putting it in people's hands. All of a sudden, we're talking about the same thing. It may not be the right thing. It may be something we need to adjust in a lot of ways, but all of a sudden, we're talking about the same thing. And when I talk about prototyping, I thought Taylor's talk yesterday was excellent. Where I want prototyping at this stage of the process, this kind of scientific method process, where I want prototyping to be is somewhere in between paper prototyping and production. So if you think of it as a curve, getting to paper prototyping is really quick. Most designers can sketch really quickly. Getting to production design quality is much further down the road and takes weeks of design effort. But good designers have enough skill in Sketch or Keynote or Photoshop, whatever tool you choose, to get something to appear to be reality, to be a facade of reality. And Taylor was talking about this yesterday. I think we can get there very, very quickly, and all of a sudden, we can have customers, and ourselves even, to suspend disbelief and have something appear to be real. So what do you do with a prototype? Well, there are typical things you can do with a prototype. You can share it with your team, right? Internally, we can build consensus around what are we actually talking about, and we can start debating about the same thing and quit talking past each other. We can try it out, right? It goes from being this abstract concept that we all have to hold in our head and imagine using to something you can tap around and really feel like you're using. But the real gold is testing it with customers. I love the talk right before this where they were talking about getting out in front of their customers as much as possible. 3 weeks is a little slow, but the general concept is excellent. And so at GV, we work on a process called design sprint, which is kind of like the 1-week master version of all these things put together. So I think all of these things are valuable on their own, and you don't need to do a whole week process to be successful. But once in a while, applying something where you're really kind of bringing all of the best of this together, I think can be a very, very effective way to be successful in your business. So I'm going to walk you through, a design sprint is this 5-day process where we unpack a problem, we sketch a bunch of solutions, we decide which of the solutions show the most promise, we do a very rapid prototype, so we're prototyping in a single day. I think that's really important. And then we're actually testing it with 5 realistic customers by the end of the week. Sorry, do you want me to go back so you can take a photo of that? Just one sec. So it's this 5-day process. And we wrote a book about it that came out last year called Sprint. If you're interested, you can check it out. I'm going to walk you through one. So we've done sprints with a ton of different companies. We've done about 120, 130 sprints at this point with a huge range of companies, everything from a coffee company to a genetics company to an oncology company to Slack to a robot company. So this company called Savioke is based down in Cupertino in California, and they're part of our portfolio. They were looking around at all the possible problems in this world that they could solve, and they decided to make autonomous robots for the service industry. Heck yeah! So they were looking at hotels. They were traveling around at hotels a lot and had some experience with how the hotel business works. And they were noticing that at the front desk almost never looks like this at the hotel when you're visiting. This is what the hotel desk looks like at about 1 p.m., right in the middle of the day. Looks nice and calm. Everyone's cool and collected. You could walk right up to that desk and get immediate service. But the hotel has a problem where the way that the service works is that there's 2 points of the day when they're slammed. And so at 8 in the morning and 8 p.m., when people are checking in and checking out, there is a massive influx of people coming to the front desk. I had this exact experience when I walked into the Radisson Hotel here in Salt Lake City. There were 6 people in front of me in line, and the front desk staff looked very harried when I walked in. And at those points of the day, all of the rest of the service in the hotel goes down. It's really hard to deliver towels to people's rooms. It's hard to go and provide a high level of service to the other people because they're so focused on getting people in and out of the hotel. It's a very scientific chart. Crazy to calm. It's kind of like that. So they decided to make a robot to help on this, right? So they made this robot called Relay. Relay is about this high, about yay big around. Has a compartment on the inside that can carry items. This is an entirely autonomous robot that will deliver items to your room. So if you call down in the morning or the evening and say that you're missing a towel, you want a toothbrush, you need a shaving kit, the person down the front desk is like, no problem, Relay is going to bring that to you. And Relay on its own will travel down the hallway, will go up the elevator, will come to your room, will stand, roll up. I'm not sure. I anthropomorphize robots a lot. It will sidle up to your room and bring you that item. They're currently deployed at the Aloft Hotel in Cupertino, and when they approached us, they were just about to go into their first pilot. So they were about 3 weeks away from their very first pilot having it out in the public. And they came to us and they're like, hey, we really want to do a sprint. There's a whole bunch of things we're worried about. And we're like, yeah, you're about to put this thing out in the wild. Like, no wonder you're worried. And we decided to do a project with them. So the first thing we did is we gathered a sprint team. So we gathered in our office in Mountain View, California, and we brought everybody together. Who do we have? Well, we have some designers. So that's my friend John Zaratsky in the plaid shirt, one of their designers, Adrian's in the front, and one of my other colleagues is in the back. So there were several of us who were designers. But really, really importantly, there were a bunch of other people. We never do a sprint, a design sprint. We actually intentionally took the word design out of design sprint because we didn't want it to be so isolating. It's never a thing where we just have designers in the room. We had an engineer. We have one of the roboticists, so this person's programming how this autonomous robot functions. We had their ambassador, which in their case is she's working with the hotels on implementation. Their CEO, is very concerned about the business. He's a roboticist himself. And their COO, who is just out of the picture. Or no, you can see his bald head right down here. He's got a cue ball head down in the corner. And as I'll show in a second how important that was. So when we talked about risk and opportunity with them, it was really interesting that we were actually about 10 minutes into the conversation about kind of what they were most worried about when their COO put up his hand, and he said, listen, even the CEO didn't bring this up. If we hadn't had their guy who was like most interested, most involved in finance in the room, we wouldn't have thought of this so much. But the CEO after about 10 minutes said, listen, like all these other concerns are valid. My biggest concern is that we need to score very high on the guest satisfaction index. And the rest of us are like, huh? What's a guest satisfaction index? I've never heard of that before. I've never worked in a hotel. I've never worked in the hoteling industry. Guest satisfaction index is the be-all and end-all of hotel service. So every time you're in a hotel and you interact with somebody in the hotel, they'll come up to you at the end and say, how is my service? Can I bring you anything else? And what they're looking for is that when you complete a survey for the hotel, that you say, I got great service and it's the best hotel I've ever stayed in. And they track this number, week over week, month over month, year over year, and they compare it, if you're in a big chain of hotels like the Aloft, they're comparing every hotel against each other. And industry-wide, they're comparing themselves against each other. This is the metric that they're tracking. And as an opportunity, their COO said, if we can increase the hotel's guest satisfaction index by a measurable amount, we will sell 1 million robots. And you're like, oh, okay, that's pretty good. I'm an investor in their business. I own a little piece of their business. I would like them to sell 1 million robots to hotels. So we added that as one of the primary factors that we were aiming for. The next thing we do is we create time pressure. So right off the front, we want to create a lot of time pressure. This is one of the real benefits of the ship early, ship often method, right? It's like we always feel like we have our pants on fire trying to get to a launch. Well, we're not launching here, but what we are doing is we're testing with customers. So on Monday, we're not even sure exactly what problem we're solving. We have some ideas about what we might do, but we're not exactly sure. We've gathered a team, we're about to decide what to do, and already we know that 5 people are going to come in on Friday. So 5 real potential customers are going to come in on Friday. And we're like, oh, crap. Every time, I've done this 30, 40 times myself. Every time you're like, oh, we'll see if we get there. And I've never done a sprint on a robot before. I'm not even quite sure what this prototype's going to look like. But we intentionally do this to provide some panic. It's good to feel that. Do we just grab people off the street? No. I've heard when people talk about lean startup, sometimes it's about coffee shop testing. We're not just popping in and picking up random people. We're a little bit more deliberate than that. In this case, on both ends of the spectrum, you either have the homebody, somebody who doesn't visit hotels very often. Well, that person doesn't even know that when they stay in a hotel, they could call down to the front desk and order something. And they're also not not one of the biggest business cases for hotels. So we're we don't want somebody down that end of the spectrum. Neither do we want a road warrior. These people who travel around and stay at hotels, 3 days out of the week, they never forget things. They have one bag, it's packed, it always has the same things in it. I'm kind of like this. I never forget anything when I go to a hotel. I don't need this service. I'll rarely interact with it. What they really want is somebody who stays at hotels relatively frequently, so is pretty familiar with the systems of a hotel, and is likely to stay in one of these hotels that they're likely to be in, but somebody who's not quite too far down the edge of the spectrum. And we recruited, in this case, off Craigslist. And we do this often when we're working in kind of a typical consumer demographic. So we post an ad on Craigslist and say, hey, we're doing a user study. If you're interested, please fill out this form. So we don't just ask them to email us. First 5 people, you're all signed up. And we fill out a form, and the form has a whole bunch of questions in it, maybe 10, 15 questions. And buried inside that form are a bunch of kind of trigger questions for us. How often do you stay at a hotel? When was the last time you stayed at a hotel? Those kinds of questions. If you're interested in how to write a screener, our full-time researcher, Michael, has written some excellent articles on this. If you go to, go to gv.com/sprint. They'll be there. But you write a screener that doesn't give leading questions, but has some filters within it that you can kind of create a spreadsheet and then filter for the right people. And you offer them $100 to come in and do a study. So that's what we were doing. Then we have to find the right challenge. So we're still on Monday here. We decide, okay, what is the challenge? So we map out the entire customer experience. You came into the hotel, maybe you saw the robot in the lobby. You certainly, unless you're fancier than me, you didn't expect to see a robot there. So that's one opportunity. We could work on the kind of first experience of witnessing a robot as someone just somebody walking through the hotel. We could be at the point of calling down and getting a delivery. We could set expectations on a card or something in the hotel room of what might happen. We could work on the problem of delivery, what happens when the robot pulls up outside your room. We could work on the problem of what it's like to be in an elevator with a robot. This is something they're really concerned about because they've tested it and they know it's safe. They know it can technically get into an elevator and get out. It actually is talking to, there's a device in the server room that the elevator operates out of. So if you didn't know this, there's a server room in a hotel and all the elevator software is in there. So this is right next to it in the rack. And so technically the robot is like talking over the network to the elevator. It's like, hey, come down and get me. And it comes down to the first floor just like when you press the button. It rolls into the thing and tries to stand at the back inconspicuously. But this whole uncertainty that they have about like, oh, there's people standing in front of it when you get to the 3rd floor because there's all the people going up to 7. Like, how does it indicate it wants to get out? Like, does it do a little shimmy? Does it go like, hey, excuse me? There's a whole bunch of opportunities there for that interaction. That could be something we work on. One of the big questions they have is how should the robot behave? So whether it's in the elevator, whether it's when you just see it in the hallway, whether it's when it pulls up outside your room, that's one of their biggest concerns. So technically, the robot works. They're quite confident. They've tested it in their own office with an elevator and like in realistic environments. They're confident it can do the job. But how should it behave, right? Like, what are people's expectations of a robot in a public space? This thing is not Wall-E. We have really strong expectations. So these guys have been working in robots for like 10 years, right? Longer than that. They used to run a group called Willow Garage down in the South Bay that was doing robotics. So they've been thinking about these problems for a long time. And one of the big risks that they've seen for robots is that we all have really strong expectations for what robots can do. We may not have really seen, a robot that works like the Relay Bot, but we've seen Wall-E and we've seen C-3PO and R2-D2. Even R2-D2 looks kind of like their robot. R2-D2 is really smart. It understands human language. It's got like a dozen ways that it can communicate with people, whether it's a hologram, whether it's bleeps and blurps, whether it's spinning, whether it's, it has all these methods of communicating. It's very, very intelligent. This thing doesn't even have a microphone on it. It can't hear you. It's not going to interact with you. And there's a real concern that people have a high cognitive expectation for the robot that it won't be able to satisfy. And there'll be this uncanny valley and you'll be frustrated with it. So they decided to bring the robot into our office under the cover of a blanket. It's like testing, you ever see those pictures of test cars when they're driving around and they just put tape on them and you're like, I can still see your car. But they rolled into our office and really did put it under cover. It came in, looked really cute. We took a selfie with it. Maybe it was really fun. This is my colleagues and I. So one of the big risks was personality. So what we want to do is find more than one solution for what we could do. We were actually testing more things than just personnel. We were testing how would it knock on the door, would people be able to receive the item, but personality was one of the overarching goals that I'm going to talk about. So first thing we do on Tuesday, now we've decided kind of what their biggest risks are, we've arranged for 5 user interviews on Friday, now we try to find more than one solution. And we're looking across this problem. We decided to focus on this whole area of the interaction when it pulls up outside your door. And so we start sketching. We actually don't do any group brainstorms. You'd be shocked if you're in a sprint that there's almost no talking. It's kind of a library atmosphere. There's lots of times that designers and product people sit around and feel like they're being very, very creative, and they're all jamming ideas together and like criticizing each other and throwing ideas up on the whiteboard, and it feels really good. Shockingly little amount of time in a company is spent with an hour in front of a piece of paper on a focused problem, recording kind of what you might solve, and actually drawing your own sketch. It's shocking how little of that happens within a company. When you're answering email, when you're in meetings, when you do all these things, we have very, very little time to actually just stop and gather our own ideas and create something more than just like throwing a thrown out little inkling. These are more fully formed, and I think it's really important that everybody is able to have time to do this. So we're sitting around, everyone's taking notes on kind of the problem space and sketching out their own concepts. In the end, we end up with little sketches like this. They're usually 3-panel sketches that we do. It's, this, you present it with this, then this thing happens, and then that, right? Little sketches of interfaces. They don't look like Da Vinci. None of us, I draw terribly. I really do, even as a designer for a long time. But boxes and text is very, very good at communicating an idea. And we end up with lots of solutions. And we put all our solution sketches up on the wall. And on the 3rd day, we try to make good decisions about which of the solutions are good ones. We're not designing by committee. We're not yelling out like, oh, this one looks great, guys, like, check out my idea, it's really cool. What I was thinking was this, and then that, and then this. We're actually walking around, each silently evaluating the ideas that everyone else has put up. So instead of talking about them, instead of pitching them, this is how commonly ideas are shared in companies. You're not allowed to convince me that your stupid idea is a good idea just because you pitch it really well. Lots of good pitch people can convince you that a mediocre idea is pretty good. The ideas have to stand on their own here. And what we do is weighted voting. And this is going to look like in consultancy, mumbo jumbo, but it's actually excellent. Is people are walking around with these little blue stickers, as many as they want, and putting it next to ideas that they think have value. In the end, you're left with a heat map of where people really focused on, which ideas from which sketches look like they've got a lot of promise. By the way, all of these concepts I'm talking to you about, there are detailed articles at the gv.com/sprint if you want to kind of read about why we do any of these methods. But in the end, we end up like this, where you see a bunch of focus around the ideas that have blue dots. And then we walk around, and somebody, the moderator, will explain what they can see is going on in the sketch. It looks like the customer's supposed to take the towel out of the thing, and then the robot, gets excited and does a spinning, motion and makes a sound, right? And everyone's like, oh, okay, why did you vote on this? And then we talk about it, right? Now we have the group discussion after everyone's had their solo kind of own votes on these things. And then really importantly, we do weighted voting. So we go around and vote with bigger dots. I know this sounds like consultancy crap. But realistically, inside a company, it's not a democracy. So what we do is we give the CEO, we give the head of product, we give the chief of design, whoever really holds the most power in the organization, we give them red dots. And they can go around and say, which are the ideas that we think we really need to prototype? Because, if you're working with a company that's a very strong-headed CEO, and their idea didn't get very many votes, 3 months down the road, when you didn't test that idea, they're going to be like, ugh, that idea I came up with that you didn't test, I still think it's better than this one, and they're going to drive the company in that direction. So you might as well be realistic about it now, and if they really think their idea is the most successful one, or even somebody else's idea is the most successful one, go test it head-to-head against the most popular one. And we'll do that in a sprint often. So we decided to try a bunch of things that seemed risky. One of them is knocking. So this thing doesn't have an articulating arm, and they were wondering kind of, there's a bunch of theses about how it might enter the room. What it's going to do is call the phone. And you'll pick up the phone, and a robot will talk to you and say, hey, I'm at the door. We're going to put a face on it. This seemed like, I know this seems obvious. This seemed really risky to them. They were really worried that if you put a human-ish face on something, that people have a very high cognitive expectation of the robot, and that they will try to talk to it and be really frustrated and then knock it over. That was actually discussed. Robot abuse was a problem. Some of the ideas had sounds in them, and at the time, keep in mind, they're 3 weeks from deploying this thing in a hotel. They had never considered putting sounds as part of the interface. And a bunch of us are like, oh, you know, R2-D2 makes sounds, and your interface on the thing is literally a tablet, you know, embedded in a kind of in a holder on the front of the robot. It has a little, you know, a little speaker built into it. What if we have it beep? And they had never even thought about this before, and it had the same risks as the face, that it could have raised cognitive expectations. We decided we were going to have a bit of a dialogue. In order to get that guest satisfaction index, we're like, oh, it could ask the same questions that a concierge might ask you, but in interface form. Like, what if it could ask you, can I get you anything else? What if it could ask you, how was my service today? If we can help track that score in a measurable way, great for your business. They'd never thought about doing that either up until this point, and it seemed like a good opportunity. And then one kind of crazy idea that came up at the end, we're like, oh, maybe we could make this really pleasurable by making it dance. And so it's on 3 wheels under the base, and so it can spin on the spot without moving, which is really important because if it ever runs over someone's foot, they're in huge trouble, right? And we're like, oh, it's right in front of you. What if we time it and have it just like spin around? Like, maybe people will find that pleasurable. Who knows, you know? Like, it seems so simple, maybe no one will care, but it's worth trying, right? It's pretty simple to try. So we went and tried a bunch of risky ideas. And what we did is we created a prototype. So in a single day, we decided to try a bunch of these ideas. So you might think that's not enough time. But we took the sketches, and the sketches, if you'll notice, have a bunch of text in them. We don't let people write lorem ipsum. They have to write real text. So what we can do is translate that right into the prototype. So in a lot of ways, what we're doing is taking low-fidelity sketches and raising the level of fidelity, just in like that graph I was showing you, from paper prototype up to, you know, suspends disbelief level of fidelity. In this case, we just use Keynote. We use a lot of different prototyping tools, a lot of different graphical tools. Sometimes we'll code a prototype. I just did one for an oncology company the other day, and we coded a prototype in a single day. I was a little more hectic than working in Keynote, but it's doable. But in this case, we just use Keynote, which is great because PMs can use Keynote, designers can use Keynote, engineers can pick it up. And we can use some little things like Keynotopia, which is like, you know, just easy form elements to drag and drop. We don't focus on creating perfect buttons. We don't focus on creating perfect interfaces, but just good enough. Adrian tackled the sound effects. He's their designer. I worked on the interaction with John Zaratsky, I think. That looks like him from behind. We worked on the choreography. In this case, we didn't program the robot. You can control it using a PS3 controller. So what we were doing is hiding around the corner with like a little mirror and controlling it, so driving it around and manually controlling the robot. And we created fairly long stories. So we had delivery for you. It would say that. It said, did you get everything requested? It would say, excellent. And we were doing timing to see if kind of there was just enough time to read the interface. It would ask you, how did I do? That's how we were going to, you know, start measuring the guest satisfaction index, see if people fill that out. And then it would do the dance and say, yippee. Do you need anything else? Sorry, I'm forgetting what we made here. We tried a bunch of different face styles. So we just rapidly went through a bunch of common kind of face styles we've seen from cartoons. Everything from kind of dopey look to a dog. And we were like, how do we set the right cognitive expectation? You know, if you don't make eyes with like pupils and stuff, like maybe we can drive it down. The extreme option is like, what if it's just a puppy? We didn't do the puppy. So now we've got the 5 customer interviews. Typically, on the 5th day when we do research, the setup is very simple, the kind of thing any of us can do in any of our offices. Typically, Michael, our researcher, sits down with somebody in a simple meeting room, no eye-tracking crap, no two-way mirrors that creep people out like they're on a cop show. Seriously, if you have a research room with two-way mirrors, take out the freaking mirrors and start using videos. But it's usually just a simple setup like this. We use a device if it's a mobile thing and a document camera sitting over the device so we can see it. That thing costs like $100. It's really cheap. We use GoToMeeting and a laptop. It's a real simple setup. We're not fancy about research. Usually, testing a robot in a hotel can be a bit more complicated. So in this case, we went to the A-Loft on Friday morning really early. They gave us a room that we could use. We brought a whole bunch of crap with us. A whole bunch of it. Tape. We set up a whole gear set in the room so we record the whole experience. We taped a bunch of stuff on the floor, mounted some cameras, and at 9 a.m., that very first participant came in. So keep in mind, this person had seen a Craigslist ad, and it said in it, I realize it's unusual to attend interviews in a hotel room. So they came in. There's this guy standing in the lobby. He's like, hey, I'm Michael. Why don't you come up to a hotel room with me? There's a whole bunch of cameras around. But don't worry, Michael's a professional. He's done this a lot of times. He wears his badge, and he told them in an email beforehand, look for me, I'll be the guy in the lobby wearing a Google badge. He showed them his badge when they came in. He keeps a distance from them. Michael's great. He's a real professional. Meanwhile, the bunch of us are back in our office watching this over video. We're using GoToMeeting here, and we're watching the interaction. The person knows they're being recorded. We're very ethical and correct about this stuff. And what happened is, the robot, one of our roboticists was hiding around the corner with the PS3 controller and drove the robot around the corner and delivered an item. And the actual interaction worked like this: is we asked them, they were in the hotel room, and Michael talked to them about what their typical visit's like, and says, do you ever forget things? And they're like, oh yeah, sometimes I forget a toothbrush. And Michael's like, well, why don't you call down to the lobby and why don't you call down and ask for a toothbrush? And they're like, okay, that's how I do it. And they call down, and it was really going to one of us. So the phone called one of us, and we were like, ma'am, can I get you anything? And they're like, yeah, I forgot my toothbrush. And you're like, okay, don't worry, I'm sending a robot up to get it, and to bring it to you. And we'd hang up the phone immediately, and the person's like, huh. And Michael's like, so what do you think's going to happen? And they're like, well, this robot's coming. And he's like, and Michael's like, well, what do you expect? And like, surprisingly, because of our interest in our expectations in sci-fi, they actually had pretty good expectations of what was going to happen. One of the guys, I swear, he got off the phone, he just like shrugged, walked over, picked up the remote, and turned on ESPN. And Michael was like, well, what's going to happen? And the guy's like, a robot's bringing my toothbrush. So that was pretty cool. And people loved the robot. So the robot would pull up, we'd call the room and say, hey, I'm here. And the person's like, oh, I guess the robot's outside. And we'd ask them, where would you expect the robot to be? And they're like, well, you better not come into the room. We're like, oh, that's a good guess. Like, it felt like a FedEx delivery. Like, if a FedEx guy comes in your house, you're like, dude, get out of my house. Not cool. So it turned out we made a bunch of good guesses, right? So people loved the robot. It made the delivery. People were able to use the interface to interact with it. The interface was too slow. We definitely learned that. And then when it spun, they finished the thing, and it'd go like, great, I delivered my item, and it goes, yippee, and like literally made that noise. It goes, wah, and it goes like this in a circle, and people were like, yay, it's the best thing ever. It was a really good reaction. It was really exciting for us watching from the other room. We're like, oh, people are like really jazzed about that. So a bunch of things worked. The delivery and handoff worked, something they were really worried about and they'd had problems with even in their testing in their office. The exciting and delightful part, people were genuinely stoked about it. The personality paid off really well. People had a really good expectation of what the robot could and couldn't do. They really didn't expect it to be listening to them. They didn't expect it to be more intelligent than it was. And we talked to them about like whether they'd rather have a person deliver it. And there was an interesting debate about that among most of the participants, and most people agreed that it was cool to have a robot bring their item. So a bunch of the risky ideas actually worked. That was great. Oftentimes when we do sprints, a bunch of things don't work. And that's also great, because keep in mind, we only spent a week working on this. When your ideas all fail, I was in one a few weeks ago, and everything was a disaster. It's a really complex problem. Just we misread kind of how people would react to it. And that was great, because we only spent a week doing it. And some guy at Google was doing a sprint recently, and he said, you either win or you learn. I really like that turn of phrase. So in this case, we won a lot, and that feels real good. And that's just one hardware example. We've done these with all kinds of companies. We did one with Slack on their onboarding process. So kind of how do you learn how Slack works? How do you invite, you go from a one-player mode of just me trying Slack to getting my coworkers involved. This is a huge trust expectation of getting other people on the app. We're testing how to kind of bridge that gap really successfully. We've worked with expert users often. They're harder to recruit, but they're totally possible. Everyone from geneticists to patients oncologists. I worked a project with a bunch of truckers once, a bunch of farmers a few weeks ago. You can recruit just about anybody. Even when we redesigned our own website, we did recruiting with entrepreneurs who were not familiar with GV, who might consider GV for a future fairly large round. We recruited 5 of those people. It's totally possible. And what we're doing is gathering the right team, a diverse group of people, not just designers. Don't just go off in the corner and try to solve problems. Prototype like is a prototype. Do it rapidly in a way that you're not in love with your own ideas, that you can throw them away if they turn out to be really bad. And do quick, credible research. In this case, we're hearing directly from customers. When things are hard for them, we can talk to them about it, and we get really good qualitative research from them. So there's step-by-step instructions at gv.com/sprint, and as I was saying, there's a book you can get on Amazon or wherever you want if you're interested. I really hope you guys can go out and sprint on your own. Thank you.